Jury's not present, accounted for, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Please be seated. All right, we're back on the record on case CR 22-21-1624, State of Idaho versus Lori Vallow. Completed the lunch break. Jurors are all present and accounted for. Detective Kaya Kamanu is on the stand still. I'll remind the witness here under oath. And the state is continuing its direct examination, I believe, at this time.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Blake, if you'd like to continue with direct, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Kaya Kamanu, we had talked about some guns that were retrieved from the apartment complex where Alex Cox was residing. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And one gun in particular seemed to draw the most attention from you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what type of firearm was that again?
That was the Alexander Arms Grendel 6.5.
And do you believe if you were shown that firearm again, you would recognize it?
Yes.
Your Honor, I believe that we do have the firearm here. If we could have it brought into the courtroom. I believe it's State's Exhibit 280.
Exhibit 280?
I believe it's 280.
All right.
I'll make sure to have the detective properly identify it to make sure I have the correct exhibit number.
All right. We'll have the firearm brought into the courtroom. As we're doing that, let me just advise you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, any firearms that are offered into evidence in the case, we'll make sure are unloaded. There's no ammunition anywhere in the courtroom for any firearms that would be admitted into evidence. The firearms also, steps have been taken to render them inoperable. I'll have the bailiff explain that a little bit more once the firearms brought in here. The firearms will not be handled at any point by the jurors, either during trial or during deliberations, but may be available for inspection with the assistance of law enforcement. And with that in mind, we'll have the law enforcement bring in the firearm that would be State's Exhibit 280.
And Your Honor, I believe there may be two more items with that, and I can get those exhibit numbers.
Okay.
And Your Honor, may the witness leave the stand to review those items, or do you want them handed to him?
I think it would be best if he did step down and just personally review the items and then can return to the stand for foundational questions. So, Detective, if you'd like to step down, you can go ahead and observe the items there on the table.
And there are three items there. I believe the other two are going to be State's Exhibits 278 and 279, but I will have the detective identify those first, what they are.
All right. So the gun itself is 280, is that correct?
Is that in fact the AR-15?
This is the Grendel 6.5.
And I can have him say that into the mic if the court would like, but yes, so that would be Exhibit 280.
Okay.
And what did you identify that firearm as?
So that firearm right there is the Alexander Arms Grendel 6.5 with a vortex scope on it.
And did you see the other item sitting next to it?
I did.
And could you identify what those are?
Those are solvent traps that were drilled into to make a homemade suppressor.
Were those also recovered during the search of the apartment complex associated with Alex Cox?
They were.
And were those seized by Fremont County?
They were first seized by Rexburg PD for safekeeping, and then Fremont County seized them on a search warrant, yes.
And they've remained in the custody of Fremont County?
Yes.
And is that, in fact, the firearm that we saw in a photo earlier?
Yes.
And again, you went over your experience with paintball guns and your experience with AR-15s. And I don't know if the witness could step down to point out some things with regard to that firearm, or if we'd like it held up for him to do that.
Let's get to the detail of getting these admitted into evidence.
Your Honor, given the identification by the detective, the state would move for their admission.
All right. Any objection to Exhibit 280, which is the gun?
If I may have voir dire and aid.
You can voir dire.
Detective, this is the gun that's in the cardboard box, correct, that you seized from Alex Cox's apartment?
That was seized from Alex Cox's apartment.
All right, and you know that to be the gun that was seized from his apartment. I guess what I'm saying is you weren't there when it was seized?
Correct, I was not there.
All right, but based on your collective knowledge within the police department, you believe that to be the same gun that was seized from Alex's apartment?
Correct.
All right, and you identified states 278 and 279 as being, I couldn't really hear what you called them.
Baffles or solvent traps?
Baffles or solvent traps. Okay, what is that?
From my knowledge, a baffle is a device that could be used to make suppressors for a firearm.
Is it just a piece of metal?
From my understanding, yes.
Okay. So those are just two pieces of metal that you found with or near the gun that was seized at the house?
Correct.
Okay. I have no objection, Judge.
Okay. So Exhibits 280 and 278 and 279 are all admitted. And so, Ms. Blake, you can continue with your direct.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I don't know if there's a mic or a way for the detective to be able to step down to identify some things with regard to that firearm for the jury.
We'll get him a wireless mic.
Thank you, Your Honor. And while we're waiting for that, you talked about those pieces of metal. Would those also be referred to as silencers
Correct.
in common lingo?
Yeah, they could be.
And if you could step down and approach that Exhibit 280. And you had described earlier your experience with paintball guns and the AR-15s, correct?
Correct.
When you're looking at that, you talked about a hopper on a paintball gun and something on an AR that could look similar. Does this AR, in fact, have what you were referring to?
Yes, this Grindle has a scope on it, a vortex scope, which is a very large scope that could be construed as a hopper.
And in your experience on the paintball guns you've used, is that where the hopper is located on a paintball gun?
The hopper on a paintball gun can sometimes come off of the side of the gun and come right up to on top of the rail.
And in your experience, some of the paintball guns you've used, can they be approximately the same size as that firearm?
Yes.
And, Your Honor, I would ask permission for the detective or someone to hold that up to display it for the jurors and then have those that scope pointed out again to make sure that they can observe it.
All right. I'd ask Deputy Vallow if you would assist in that, please.
And Detective Kaikamanu, if you could just go over and point again where you were saying that scope is to make sure the jurors can see it.
Again, right here is the vortex scope that comes down on the top of the rail of the rifle.
And if you could describe again where the hopper is sometimes located on paintball guns you have experience using.
Before we answer, Mr. Thomas, would you like to go where you can observe what's being pointed out?
Thanks, Judge.
All right.
And, Your Honor, would you like me to have him point out that scope again once Mr. Thomas is there?
Now, yes, thank you, Ms. Blake.
So now that, Mr. Thomas, can you see?
Yes.
Detective Kaikamanu, can you once again point out where that scope is that you're referencing?
So again, the vortex scope is on the top of the rail of the rifle.
And in your experience working with paintball guns, can you indicate again where the hopper is located?
On a paintball gun, paintball gun comes out the side and comes up right above the rail of the paintball gun.
And in your experience, can a paintball gun resemble an AR-15?
Yes.
Just one moment. And I don't have any additional questions at this time, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Blake. Go ahead and just have the exhibit set down on the table there. Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. All right, Mr. Thomas, cross-examination.
Detective, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. So, you indicate that you've worked for Fremont County for a number of years. How many years was that?
18.
18. And how long as a detective?
7.
And you indicate that you're a lieutenant over the detectives at this time?
Sergeant over detectives.
Sergeant. And how long have you been the sergeant over the detectives?
Approximately year and a half.
Okay. So you were just a regular detective, and now you're the sergeant over the detectives. Is that right?
Correct.
There hasn't been any move back to patrol or back to another capacity in the sheriff's office in the last 7 years? You've been in the detectives division?
Correct.
Okay. All right. You indicate that you had some special training. You went to post. Did you go to college anywhere before post, or?
I did not.
Okay. So the first thing that Ms. Blake had you talk about was the October 19th incident where Ms. Daybell had passed away. On that particular day, you said that you were on call. You were the on-call detective. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So, and how many detectives do you have in your division?
At that time, we had myself and one other detective.
And that was
Detective Mattingly.
Mattingly. And then Greenhalgh was not a detective.
Correct. She was
Okay.
not.
So it's you and Mattingly are detectives on October 19th, 2019. So you switch off between being on call for that? Is that how it works?
Correct.
Okay. And so you're on call that night. You get a call from Greenhalgh, but you don't answer it because you're asleep or something else is going on. Is that right?
Correct.
All right. And so she talks to Detective Mattingly, but you still go out to the scene later that morning?
Negative. I didn't go out to the scene.
Oh, okay. So Greenhalgh was at the scene, Mattingly was at the scene, and then there were 2 coroners at the scene?
There was 2 coroners at the scene, Deputy Greenhalgh, and I do not believe Detective Mattingly went to the scene.
Oh, he didn't go to the scene either?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. But you somehow got in touch with Greenhalgh or Mattingly and talked about whether or not there needed to be further investigation, is that right?
Correct.
You were asking about suspicious circumstances?
Correct.
And there was nothing out of the ordinary about the death at that time?
Not that I was informed of.
Okay. And who else did you talk to besides Greenhalgh? Did you talk to Mattingly?
That same day?
Yeah.
I did not.
Okay. So you only talked to Greenhalgh?
Correct.
Did you talk to either of the coroners?
I did not.
Okay. So based on that, were you the one that made the call that there wasn't going to be any follow-up investigation on that?
I was not.
Who was the one who made that call?
I believe it was Detective Mattingly and the coroners.
Okay. So Mattingly didn't go out to the scene. So were you the sergeant over? Were you in charge, the head guy at that time, or no?
At the time, I was not a sergeant, no.
Okay. Who was the sergeant over you guys?
We didn't have a sergeant at the time. It was Lieutenant Powell that was over the detective division.
Okay. And did either of you go to Lieutenant Powell and chat with him about this at all? On that particular day? I guess I should clarify that. On that particular day, October 19th.
I believe Detective Mattingly spoke with Lieutenant Powell. I am not aware of what was said in that conversation.
Okay. All right. But then you indicate that a couple weeks later you got involved with, or the Fremont County Sheriff's Office got involved with Tammy's death, right?
Correct.
And you got involved in March of 2020.
Yeah, around that time.
Okay.
Yes.
The state said that this was some sort of a joint investigation because it involved an investigation of Brandon Boudreau, the two missing kids, as well as Charles Vallow. Is that right?
Correct.
And when you say joint investigation, what is your understanding of what a joint investigation is?
My understanding of a joint investigation is criminal activity that's happened over several jurisdictions and states, and that's when we get involved if something happened in our jurisdiction.
And I probably phrased it poorly. Let me just ask you this: when I say joint investigation, and you say, yeah, we were involved in a joint investigation, what kind of sharing of information goes on? I mean, are you fully involved? Are you not very involved? How does that work?
At the time when Fremont County got involved, we were asked to locate a Jeep out of Texas, or the plate out of Texas. That Jeep belonged to Tylee Ryan, and she had gone missing. That is, I believe, when Lieutenant Powell got that call, and that's how we got involved.
Okay. And how about when you got involved?
When I got involved, it was already underway with the attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreau, the homicide on Charles Vallow, Tylee and JJ missing, and then the suspicious death into Tammy Daybell.
Okay. And so you were part of that joint investigation starting in March of 2020, correct?
Correct.
All right. So were you in the know about the investigation of the Brandon Boudreau shooting?
I was aware of it, yes.
Okay. And are you aware if they were able to find any shell casings or any bullets or anything like that?
I don't believe they did, but I can't say yes or no on that.
Okay. And that's kind of where I was going with the joint investigation. How much did you know about what other jurisdictions knew? So that's kind of where I'm going with my questions for you. So you didn't know if they found any bullets or any casings or anything like that in the Brandon Boudreau investigation?
Correct.
All right. And then you started investigating the attempted shooting of Tammy Daybell. Were you the point man on that?
I didn't investigate that. I looked into that report, and no, I was not the point deputy on that case.
Who was the point on that case?
Deputy Coulter Cannon.
Okay. All right. So when you say you looked into it, what do you mean you looked into it?
When I got involved on Tammy Daybell's death, I had figured out that we got a call for an attempted shooting at that residence. And so that's when I read his report and started looking into it that way.
So you read Coulter Cannon's report?
Correct.
Okay. And then there was an email that was circulated and that was actually brought into evidence. You recall that this morning?
If you're referring to the one that Tammy wrote to Mark, then yes.
Yes, I'm referring to Exhibit 291. Can I take a look at 291, please? Thank you. Your Honor, can I publish parts of 291?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So this, so this is the first page of 291. You recall reading from the bottom of that page earlier?
Yes.
Okay. And you basically just referenced who it was to and who it was from, right?
Correct.
But you reviewed the entire email, right?
Correct.
All right. But and the email is 3 pages long, is that right?
I would have to look at it again.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. So this first page really doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about or what we're here for today, correct?
Correct.
All right. What does it have to do with, if you recall?
She had me emailed several people. This one looks like it's emailed to Shirley Newman. They talk about a lot of church stuff. She goes back and forth. She emails several people on all that.
Okay. And I guess I'm wondering, how is it that the stuff that's really pertinent got put onto this particular email?
That I cannot answer.
Okay. So now I'm flipping to page 2, and what is that email? What is that portion of the email about?
So the beginning of this portion of the email, Tammy is talking about how her neighbor's dog was out, and somebody drove by and took her neighbor's dog.
Stole the dog.
Stole the dog. And Mrs. Price got in her vehicle, chased the person who stole her dog down, and confronted her, got her dog back, and then went into labor.
And that portion of the email about stealing the dog actually becomes pertinent to this investigation, doesn't it?
I wouldn't say pertinent.
Okay. What would you call it?
I would just say it was part of an email that she wrote to Mark on what was happening on the events of that day.
Okay. Let's turn to the last page of this email. So the last page of this email, the first full paragraph, starting with his theory. Do you know who he is when they're talking about his theory?
She is referring to Mr. Price.
All right. And Mr. Price is referenced in the line just above it, right?
Correct.
All right. And that's how you know that it's Mr. Price?
Correct.
All right. Would you go ahead and read that paragraph for me?
His theory is that the crazy dog lady brought her husband back to steal the dog again. They had parked down the road, and he had snuck through the cow fields. He was going to cut through the front yard when I pulled up and startled him. He didn't know what to do, so he panicked and tried to menace me with the non-real gun, and then ran off across the field, which would explain why he ran to the north side of the house and why I never heard a car and we couldn't find anyone or him anywhere. It's actually a pretty good theory, and Matt is going to do some amateur sleuthing since the lady told Regan where she lives. I'll keep you posted if we ever figure anything else out.
Okay. And so when you followed up with this and you talked to Matt or talked to Regan, what did you find out?
That's what was happening, and that was his theory.
And when you talked to the guy, the lady that stole the dog, when you talked to her husband, what did he have to say?
I didn't talk to him.
You didn't follow up on this lead?
I did not.
You didn't think it was a credible lead?
I did not.
Okay. In fact, let's ask this. I don't want to jump the gun here. So I'm turning back to page 2, and let's read the first full paragraph from the bottom. It starts, "I think I was a bit in shock." Can you read that for me?
What paragraph?
Just above. It starts out with, "I think I was a bit in shock."
I think I was a bit in shock because I said, "What do you think you were doing?" Then I noticed the rifle was actually a paintball gun. It had a hopper on it. The guy started pulling the trigger, and I could just hear the clicking and whooshing sound of an empty paintball gun. He stayed standing by the back of the car, just pulling the trigger while pointing the gun at me. For some reason, I just kept asking him what he thought he was doing. At that point, I was actually more annoyed than scared because he was standing between me and the door. And he didn't step towards me or even say anything. The scared part came after, when my brain thought of what things could have happened.
Okay. So let's take this a little bit at a time here. She's talking to the man, right? This is what she says in her email. "What do you think you're doing?" Right? Okay. So she identifies that he's close enough to her to at least have a conversation. Did you follow up with how far she was from this person?
Again, I didn't do the investigation at this point when this call came out, so no, I did not.
Okay. But you said you followed up on stuff.
Correct.
This isn't one of the things you followed up on?
I did not have a chance to talk to Lori Daybell by the time I got this case.
Okay. And it says the guy started pulling the trigger, and I could just hear clicking and whooshing sound of an empty paintball gun, right?
Correct.
All right. So when you fire an AR-15, or I'm not sure if this is an AR-15. Is this an AR-15?
This is an Alexander Grendel 6.5.
Right. And for the normal person like me who doesn't have assault rifles, is this considered an assault rifle?
It's on an assault rifle platform, yes.
Okay, so it's an AR, just not an AR-15. It would be an AR Grendel 6?
Correct, 6.5.
Okay, 6.5, sorry. Okay, so when firing, have you ever fired one of these?
Not Grendel 6.5, no, I have not.
Okay. So you don't know what they sound like when they're fired?
I do not.
Okay. Do you have experience with other assault rifles, though, correct?
Correct.
Some that are similar to this?
Correct.
Okay. Do they make a whooshing sound when they're fired?
If you were to have a suppressor on it, and depending on what size of bullet, it wouldn't make a whooshing sound, but it'd be very quiet.
Okay. So when you say what type of bullet, you would have to actually have a subsonic type of bullet, right?
Correct.
Something that is a specialized bullet specifically for guns that you put suppressors on, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And where do you get that ammunition?
I'm not sure if you can buy it. Usually people make it.
Okay.
Reload.
Okay. And did you find any reloading equipment or any of this type of subsonic things that are subsonic type ammunition in Alex Cox's apartment?
In Alex Cox's belonging, there were some reloading equipment, not a full setup, but there were some.
Okay. You didn't find any subsonic bullets or subsonic casings?
I did not.
Okay. Would you hear the click and the whoosh if you were to fire that with a suppressor on it?
Again, it depends on the caliber that's going through. Maybe a malfunction, you would hear a click. But other than that, that's about it.
Right, but if you would hear the click, you wouldn't hear the whoosh, right?
Correct.
So you'd either hear a click or a whoosh.
Possibly, yes.
Okay, but generally not both.
Generally not both, yes.
Okay, and when this type of a firearm is fired, where does the casing go? It ejects, is that correct?
Correct.
All right, and it would go somewhere in the general area of where the person who shot it, probably within 6 feet, I'm assuming?
Possibly. I'm not sure of the trajectory, but yeah, possibly, unless they had a malfunction and the casing stayed inside the rifle.
Well, if they had a malfunction and the casing stayed inside the rifle, you wouldn't hear any more clicks and any more whooshing, right?
You would hear a click.
But no whooshing?
No whooshing.
Okay. And so, did you later go out to the scene of this particular event and with a metal detector try to find some sort of casings or bullets or anything?
I did not go out there. I do know that there was a warrant for that residence, and at that time, several other deputies and officers did do that with metal detectors and tried to locate a casing.
Okay. Did they find anything?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. When you looked around, you obviously looked around the property, right? Where this bullet would have, the trajectory that it would have gone to?
Again, I was not out there.
Okay. To your knowledge, did anybody find any bullet holes in any buildings or any of the houses or cars or anything nearby?
To my knowledge, no.
Okay. But you guys looked?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so let's read, starting with this last paragraph on that page. It's 3 lines long, and then we'll read the remainder of that paragraph on the next page. Can you go ahead and do that for me?
The thought crossed my mind to hit him with my clogging shoes, but first I looked towards the house and yelled, "Chad." The guy ran off around the north side of the house. I ran in the house and got Dad and Garth. They looked outside, but we couldn't find him. We called the police and reported it. They suspect it was a bipolar teenager who lives down the street and walks around a lot. But Matt Price has a better theory.
All right. And so the suspect, they thought, was a person who was a bipolar teenager who lives down the street and walks around a lot. Is that right?
Correct.
All right. And did you check into that bipolar teenager?
We talked to several individuals around the area about the bipolar is what they put there, the bipolar teenager, and in fact found out he had autism, and he lived a lot further away from the Daybell residence than what would have been in walking distance.
Okay. And I don't want to drag an autistic child into this, but did you end up talking to the autistic child?
I did not.
Okay. So no further follow-up was done on the suspected bipolar teenage child?
No.
Okay. So of all the people mentioned in here that it could be, you really didn't follow up talking to any of those people that were mentioned in here?
We talked to Matt and Regan Price.
Right, but they weren't suspected of shooting Tammy, right?
No, that was Matt's theory.
Okay. But the people that were suspected, the theories or the people that were suspected of doing this, you didn't talk to any of them?
Correct.
Okay. So through your investigation, you did some, and I'm sorry, I'm done with this exhibit. Thank you. I would like to now see 107B. Thank you. So, we've already established that there is a gun that you found in Alex Cox's possession, correct?
Rexburg PD found that, yes.
I'm sorry. When I say you, I guess I mean collectively the joint investigation.
Correct.
Okay. So I'd like to turn to this second page. And this is a lot harder than it looks. Getting this thing stabilized. I was, all right. So we've established that you found, or somebody found, a Grendel 6.5. Does anybody know when that gun was purchased?
I don't have that in the investigation. I believe our guys have looked into that and do know.
So somebody knows, but you don't?
Correct.
Okay. Do you know who might know?
I believe Detective Consitis or FBI Agent Douglas.
Okay. And they ran the serial number off of the gun?
That I am not sure.
Okay. Is that I'm just asking because I don't know. Is that how you would generally do it, is run the serial number?
Usually when we collect guns, yes, we run all the serial numbers. I do not know if they did.
Okay. And that's generally to see if they're stolen or something like that?
Correct.
And how would you find the purchase? And again, I've never bought a gun, so I don't really know. But when you purchase a gun, I'm assuming they have to do something with that serial number, or no? Do you know?
What do you mean by doing something to it?
Well, when somebody sells me something, I get a receipt for it. But do we have to register the gun in some way, or is it just only if it comes up stolen? Is that when they put it in the system?
When you purchase a firearm, they'll associate that serial number to whoever purchased it.
Okay.
So that's how that's done.
Okay. And so that's how you track, that's how you're assuming that maybe Detective Consitis found that out?
Along with receipts.
Okay. So would it be out of the ordinary for someone to search, if they bought a gun like that, to make searches like 6.5 Grendel drop from 100 yards to 200 yards, if they owned a 6.5 Grendel?
It would depend what they're shooting it for.
Okay. What would you shoot that particular gun for?
Usually long range.
Okay. Hunting?
Depends. I wouldn't purchase that firearm for hunting.
Right. It's only for target practice or for guys to be machismo and, hey, I got a big gun, right?
Correct.
Okay. So if you go to the range, are you going to want to know what, and maybe, let me just ask you this because I'm not really sure about it either. 6.5 Grendel drop from 100 yards to 200 yards. What does that mean?
So the further you're back in yardage in shooting, your bullet's going to drop a little bit. And so with your scope is you need to dial that in. So you shoot to get it accurate from several different yards, different 100 yards, so you can be accurate at one. And usually when you get that sighted in, you kind of stay at that yardage for that.
And so when you say that the bullet is going to drop, it's due to gravity, it's due to drift, it's due to wind, those kinds of things, right?
Correct.
All right. And so if you're target practicing, you're going to want to be on target, am I right?
Correct.
And the way to know that is to go through the internet, make these searches, find those kinds of things. Is that one way to do it?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Another way would be to find somebody who has one of these, and you can talk to them, and they can, you can form a club or whatever and be buddy-buddy and work it out that way, right?
Yes.
But if you're new to the area, one of the best ways to do that is to get online, right?
Correct.
All right. And these Google searches that were done on October the 10th, the reason that you did a summary is because what the state reporter or what they told the court was because there was a voluminous information, and it's to kind of square down and pack down what your pertinent ones were, right?
That's not why I looked these specific dates over, no.
Okay. But what you found on these specific dates, these are not the only searches that were done on those particular dates.
Correct.
All right. There were some searches that you didn't put on here.
On the Google search itself, like this says up at top, these were the Google searches of that day of this information.
All the Google searches?
Yes.
Every search that he did on that day is on this piece of paper.
There were some other searches as far as, if you'd like me to go in that, I can.
Yeah, tell me everything that was on that day.
There were
Starting
other
from
searches
midnight.
of,
Talking over the top of each other. And
Okay.
make a record.
Starting from midnight, tell me every search that was on October the 10th, 2019 that came off of this Google account.
I'm not sure starting at midnight, but there were several searches of trannies. There were several searches of pornography that I didn't think was pertinent to this slide to bring in today.
Okay. So what you're saying is there are a lot of other things that were on this Google search that was done throughout the day rather than these particular searches that you made.
Correct.
Okay. So I guess what I'm saying is we're not trying to mislead the jury to say, hey, this guy is a gun nut and he's looking at this specific things all day long. This is all he's doing. There was a lot of other things he was doing.
Correct.
All right. Same thing on this slide. October the 12th, 2019. These are not the only searches that were done on October the 12th, 2019, correct?
Correct.
There were a lot of other searches.
Similar to what I just mentioned.
All right. There's a lot of other things going on, right?
Correct.
All right. Okay. On this particular slide, I don't know that you know this. You probably shouldn't know this because we had another person who testified, and he actually showed what searches or what who had signed in on every single day. And these were long sheets of paper, correct? Like a full sheet of paper. There were other people's names on these, right?
Yes.
All right, and that's where you got the information on this particular slide was from those sign-in sheets, right?
Yes.
All right. And so when you went to Fremont County Sportsman's Club, who did you talk to when you went there?
That was Lieutenant Powell that got this information. And
Okay, so this isn't your information?
this is not my information that I retrieved, no.
So somebody else made this slide for you?
No, I made this slide with our prosecutors, but the information was from another report. Again, it goes back to a joint investigation that we have shared information and put everything together.
Okay, and who was it that did this particular investigation?
When Lieutenant Powell was first started on the investigation, he retrieved this information. When I took over the investigation, he was no longer part of the investigation, so I took over that information.
Okay, and in the information that he gave to you, there's a report that indicated that he had actually talked to people at the Fremont Sportsman's Club?
He talked to Les Ball, who is he's the president of the board
Okay.
of the Sportsman's Association.
All right. And did you or anybody that you know actually go out to the Sportsman Club and investigate anybody that was on any of those sheets?
Anybody else that was on the names?
Any of the names that were on the sheets of paper on the days that you're alleging that Alex Cox was there with the name of C. Quint?
Not to my knowledge, no.
So you didn't do any investigation? Nobody did any investigation as to who else was there, who might have seen Alex Cox there?
No.
Okay. So based on the totality of what we were looking at, you're saying that you didn't investigate and you don't know who investigated the autistic boy or bipolar teenager, and you didn't investigate or you don't know that anybody investigated the person, the husband who stole the dog, and nobody went out and talked to anybody at the shooting range who may have seen Alex Cox on that day. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, when you did the investigation with regards to the geofence, you did a geofence warrant for two different locations, 202 North, 1900 East, and that's Chad's house, correct?
Correct.
And you also did 3462 North Salem Highway, and that's the church that's about 2.7 miles from Chad's house?
2.6.
2.6 miles?
Correct.
Okay. And you did a geofence of 150-meter perimeter, is that right?
Correct.
So how does that work? Do you go from the center of the property 150 yards in either direction, or 150 yards total?
It's in the center of the property, 150 yards all the way around in a circle.
So 150 yards in any direction?
150 meters, yes.
I'm sorry, 150 meters. And a meter is roughly a yard, right?
Roughly, but we'll stick with meters.
Okay. Meter is 3.3 feet, right?
That I am not sure off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, I dove in college, and I'm telling you it's 3.3 feet. Would that be accurate? But
Objection, Your Honor. Defense is trying to introduce testimony, not in evidence.
Sustained.
Okay. All right. So we'll say meters, okay, for whatever it's worth. 150 meters. Do you know how far 150 meters is if you were standing at one end of a football field?
I do not.
Okay. You have no idea?
No idea.
Not even a clue?
I just said no.
Okay. All right. Do you know how many feet 150 meters is?
I do not.
Didn't bother to check to see how far it was?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. I think the detective already testified to the distance within the warrant.
It's asked and answered.
Okay, Judge. So 150 meters, you indicated that you thought that Chad Daybell's phone, or I'm sorry, not Chad Daybell's phone, Alex Cox's phone was in the church parking lot within 150 meters.
I testified to a device that was associated with Alex Cox's Homer J. Maximus was pinging in the vicinity of the church.
Within 150 meters?
Within the 150 meters of my geofence location.
Okay. And did you get specific, anything more specific than somewhere within 150 meters?
I guess I don't understand that question.
Okay. you have a geofence location, which is a large circle, right?
Correct.
I'm just going to guess. And then you have a pinpoint in the middle of that circle, which would be the dot where everything is focused on, right?
Correct.
Okay. So is there anything within that larger circle, can you pinpoint in any particular direction or any particular area where this Homer J. Maximus phone was located, or was it the only information you got was it was somewhere within the 150-meter range?
It was showing Wi-Fi hits off the backside of the church.
Okay. Okay, and that's what you got, was the Wi-Fi hits?
Correct.
And the Wi-Fi hits came from somebody else's house?
Correct.
Okay. Can I have you walk over and pick up 278 or 279, actually both of them?
And Your Honor, I don't know if he's going to have him walk back to the stand or if we need the handheld mic again.
Well, 278 and 279 can just be delivered to him on the stand.
That's fine, Judge.
Okay, you can return to your seat. Thanks.
And I apologize for the interruption, just wanted to clarify that.
That's fine, Ms. Blake. Thank you.
So I think you testified earlier that 278 and 279 were, I forgot what you called them now.
Baffles.
Baffles. Okay. So when I said, so baffle is just a chunk of metal, is that right? Is that what you're looking at?
From my understanding, yes.
Okay. Is there anything that, I mean, it's a round piece of metal, right? It's circular, kind of like a tube,
Yes.
and it's solid?
Yes.
All right. And there's not been any drill holes in it or anything like that?
There's a drill hole on both ends.
Okay. And does it go all the way through?
No.
Okay. So it couldn't be used as a suppressor. It would actually blow the gun up, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Nothing further.
All right, let's have the exhibits returned to the table there, please. Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Kaikamanu, you were asked about whether or not anyone else responded out on the morning of October 19th, 2019, besides the deputy and the two individuals from the coroner's office, correct?
Correct.
And to the best of your knowledge, did any detectives respond out that morning?
No, they did not.
Do you know why that was?
When I called the coroner back after I missed her call approximately an hour later, she had told me that she had already talked to Detective Mattingly and had walked through everything with Detective Mattingly. After that conversation, I also asked Deputy Greenhalgh, again, if anything was out of the ordinary, any forced entry, anything sticking out to her. I was not made aware of anything. I also asked her if the coroner saw anything that was different or out of the ordinary. She told me no.
And on October 19th of 2019, were you aware of or had you heard of J.J. Vallow?
Of October 19th,
Yes, prior to Fremont County becoming involved, had you heard of J.J. Vallow?
yes.
And did you hear of J.J. Vallow before you became involved in the investigation?
I did.
Did you hear of him prior to the end of October?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm going to object. These questions are all beyond the scope of cross-examination. I didn't talk anything about J.J. Vallow.
I'll overrule that at this point, Ms. Blake, but it's getting close to beyond the scope, I would say.
On October 19th of 2019, were you, actually I'll back up, you testified that you did not become involved in an investigation regarding the death of Tammy Daybell until 2020, is that correct?
Correct.
And I think you also testified in response to Cross that when Fremont became involved, they were assisting or looking for a Jeep.
Correct.
Do you know if that Jeep was reported to have been involved in or suspected in criminal activity?
I believe it was.
And do you know where that criminal activity would have occurred?
In Gilbert, Arizona.
Was Fremont County in... And do you know when that request was made, or approximately when?
I can't think of it off the top of my head. I would have to refer.
I think you testified previously Fremont County did not become involved in a joint investigation until the end of October of 2019?
Correct.
And that was after the death of Tamara Daybell?
Correct.
So on the morning she died, to the best of your knowledge, did Fremont County have all of the information regarding those other investigations?
They did not have all the information, no.
You were asked about why there was some other information on that email that you were looking at?
Yes.
And at the bottom of that first page, you'd read off the sender, the person it was sent to, and a date. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then the body of that actual email started on the next page. Is that correct?
Correct.
So with the phone extraction, would there have been remnants of a prior email?
Yes.
And that's what was contained on the first page?
Yes.
And you were asked a lot about the content of that email, specifically mention of a bipolar teen.
Correct.
Did that seem plausible to you?
No.
What about a dog thief or her husband? Did that seem like a plausible suspect?
No.
The Daybell residence, can you describe the area where it's located? Is it a city? Is it rural?
So the Daybell residence is at 202 North, 1900 East, at a crossroads, which is a rural area and a farm community. On the east side of their house and the northeast side of their house is just open field for several hundred yards. It's a farming area, and it's very open.
Do you get a lot of reports of masked gunmen in that area?
No.
Do you know, I believe in that email from Tammy, she referenced that this had happened at night, this attempted shooting?
Correct.
Where this house is located, are there street lights or city lights?
No, at the time of the attempted shooting on Tamara Daybell, there was a blinking yellow light, but that would have been the only light around the area.
And you'd talked earlier about some location data in relation to a device associated with Alex Cox. Was that device in the area of the Daybell residence earlier that day on October 9th of 2019?
The Homer J. Maximus, a device associated with that, yes, there was.
And are you aware of one of the roads that runs by the Daybell residence? I think their house sits at an intersection, is that correct?
Correct.
And one of the roads is the Salem Highway.
Yes, one's the known as the Salem Highway or 1900 East, and the one that crosses that is 200 North.
And on that 200 North, are you aware or familiar with some kind of a pullout for a canal?
I am.
Judge, we're not talking about that. We're going far afield.
I'll sustain that. I think it's beyond the scope, Ms. Blake.
Your Honor, the detective was asked a lot about why he didn't follow up on certain leads. I think this goes directly to that. So I think it is within the bounds of the cross.
Of the direct you did, it's beyond the scope, and with the cross as well, so I will sustain the objection, Ms. Blake.
With this particular gun that we've talked a lot about, can you tell by looking at it if it is threaded for a silencer or a suppressor?
By looking at it, yes, you can put a suppressor on there.
If you put a suppressor on a firearm in your experience, can it change the sounds?
Yes.
When you conduct an investigation, do you go where the evidence leads you?
Yes.
Is that what you did in this case?
Yes.
And is that in fact why you were looking at searches associated with Homer J. Maximus?
Yes.
And is that in fact why you looked at shooting range logs, specifically looking for anyone or an identifier associated with Alex Cox?
Yes.
You were asked by defense if you had a chance to talk to Tammy about the paintball gun incident. You responded you did not.
Correct.
Is that because she was killed 9 to 10 days later?
That is correct.
I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. That'll conclude the testimony of Detective Kai Kamanu. I believe he'll continue to be made available to the state. Is that correct?
We would actually ask that he be released.
Okay. Any
No objection.
All right. Thank you for your testimony today. Counsel, could I have a brief sidebar before we call another witness? All right, upon conferring with counsel in a sidebar, the defense does intend to introduce some exhibits, which may take some time. However, they're going to make a further review of that, see where they agree or disagree with the state. We may probably hear motion on that in the morning, potentially outside of the presence of the jury, to determine where that stands. In order to allow the parties to get prepared for that, I am going to find that we'll conclude for this afternoon for the day's proceedings, and so we'll just plan on starting again tomorrow. I'll also indicate tomorrow there's another hearing the court has to take up later in the afternoon, so we'll be stopping a little bit early tomorrow, probably around 3:10, no later than 3:15 for our end time tomorrow. So that will conclude the testimony for today. The cross-examination of this witness will commence in the morning before we break for the day. I will give the jurors the daily admonishment to please continue to follow the court's instruction to not discuss this case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. Please don't look the case up, read about it in any way. If you see it being reported in the media, please don't watch the reports, and continue to do your duty to remain impartial in this case so you can reach a verdict only on the evidence that you've seen here in court. With that in mind, we appreciate your continued service, and we will recess for the day.
All right, please.
But it's possible.
All right, please be seated. All right, the first matter I'll just take up is as it relates to exhibits that were just admitted. Idaho's got an administrative rule, Rule 71, which allows, if the parties stipulate, to have either dangerous or large or bulky exhibits represented by photograph. There's been a photograph admitted into evidence of the gun, which the gun itself is Exhibit 280, and those corresponding baffles 278 and 279. I've suggested that upon looking at that rule that perhaps the parties want to agree that for purposes of the record of the case that those items would still be kept in custody of the state. However, for purposes of the record of the case could be represented by photographs. So I wanted to ask, that needs to be done by stipulation of the party pursuant to the rule. Would the state stipulate to have exhibits 278, 279, and 280 represented by photograph in lieu of the actual physical exhibits for the post-trial issues?
That would be actually the request of the state, Your Honor, so we would stipulate.
All right, thank you. Does the defense have any objection, or would I should ask better, would the defense stipulate to that?
Yeah, the defense will stipulate, but I'm wondering if the state would stipulate to not use this particular numbered exhibit as the one they're going to use in the Chad Daybell case, so that we don't, for the appellate record, they're looking at, the photograph of whatever number this is, and confuse it with the Chad Daybell one that's probably going to be used.
And Your Honor, we may use the same exhibit, but we would not have an objection to making sure that it is numbered differently, so there is no confusion.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll stipulate.
Thank you, Mr. Thomason. We'll keep the record clear, and it would be remarked in that trial with a separate number. And we can also make an additional record in that case if it's used as an exhibit. The other matter that was to be brought up outside of the presence of the jury was a request pertaining to one or more witnesses that I believe Mr. Archibald indicated believes there may have been some violation of the court's exclusionary rule and order in this case. If you'd like to argue that at this time, Mr. Archibald, I'll hear your argument. I'll hear from the state and then take the matter under advisement during the break.
And Your Honor, our request would be that we take these separately. I think there's different potential arguments from the defense for each witness. So I think if we could take them up separately, and the first one regarding our next witness, Ian Pulowski.
Okay, Mr. Archibald, then if you'd like to start with, the state intends to call Ian Pulowski next. What's the issue you've got with that?
Your Honor, we received information that Melanie Pulowski, or Melanie Bedreau, who's married to Ian Pulowski, that Melanie listened to testimony, that she read articles, all in contradiction to the exclusionary rule, that Melanie and Ian are married and came here to Boise, Idaho together. They have attorneys with them. And so we believe that Ian Pulowski has violated the rule just because we believe he's talked to his wife. His wife, Melanie, has admitted that she's violated the exclusionary rule. So with both of the witnesses, both Ian Pulowski and Melanie Pulowski, would ask that the court conduct an inquiry, and if violated the rule, that they be excluded.
All right, thank you, Mr. Archibald. Any response to the argument?
Thank you, Your Honor. The state is aware of the information provided to defense. It was actually provided by the state based on information that came into our possession. However, there is absolutely no indication that this particular witness, Ian Pulowski, has reviewed or observed or listened to any of the testimony in this case. So to simply assume that his wife may have told him about anything she learned or observed or knew is a stretch. And so based on what the state has been told by Mr. Pulowski, we do not see that there would be any issue with the exclusionary rule, and would ask that he be allowed to testify.
Okay, counsel, what I'll do is take the issue under advisement pending an inquiry after Mr. Pulowski's been placed under oath. I'll have him brought in to be questioned outside the presence of the jury at the end of the break here before the jurors are brought back in. So if we need to go into an in-depth line of questioning with him, we can do that without the jurors overhearing. Is there an issue with any other witness, Mr. Archibald?
Those are the issues with those two witnesses. Looking at the clock, doesn't look like we'll get to Melanie Pulowski, but if they call Ian first, then we can do the inquiry with him.
All right. Does the state intend to call Melanie?
Your Honor, the state may intend to call her, but we would ask to take that up separate, given the separate issues involved and before her testimony.
Okay. So right now then we'll just deal with the Ian Pulowski issue. We'll take that up at the end of the break. I gave, I think, about 30 minutes. So why don't we come back in at about 20 till, if you can have Mr. Pulowski here ready to be sworn, and we'll start that inquiry before the jurors are brought back in and start that up here in a little over 20 minutes. So we'll be in recess until then.
All rise.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, we are back on the record on case CR 22-21-1624, State of Idaho versus Lori Vallow. We are, during the afternoon break, the jurors have not returned to the courtroom yet. We had a motion relating to the court's exclusionary order in this case, argued by the parties before, or at the beginning of the break, and the court indicated it would inquire directly of the witness and allow any additional argument before the jurors are brought in. So is the state ready to call Mr. Pulowski?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, if you can have your witness brought in, we'll have him sworn.
Your Honor, I should also note for the record, he has counsel here with him. It is Garrett Smith out of Arizona. It's my understanding that Mr. Smith was going to be here to observe and available if necessary, recognizing, though, that he is not here specifically as an Idaho licensed attorney to interject at any point in the proceedings.
All right, he's permitted to be here, and we'll have a seat assigned to him once he enters with his client.
Sir, if you approach me, please. Please stand for the raise your right hand and respond.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Pulowski, you've been sworn. The court has entered in this case what's called an exclusionary order relating to a rule that does not allow witnesses to view or listen to other witnesses' testimony in the trial before they testify. There's been some concern that there may be an issue in regards to that order. The concern was brought forth by, well, information was provided by the state, and the defense has made an argument. So I'll have a question or two of my own for you, and then you may also be examined first by the attorneys as we sort through that issue prior to your providing testimony in front of the jurors. So there's some indication that I guess your, would you just indicate on the record who your wife is?
Melanie Pulowski.
Okay, and the information we had was that she had listened in or perhaps observed some trial testimony. Is that something you're aware of?
To my knowledge, she hasn't listened to anything. There was a point where her ex-husband, Brandon Boudreau, testified, and there's some ongoing litigation between Melanie and Brandon, and so there was some information that she read, I don't know if it was headlines, that she had concerns about. I didn't really get any details. There didn't seem to be anything of substance there for her, so all I knew is that he testified.
Okay. Have you personally listened to any of the testimony that's occurred in this trial?
No.
Have you read any of it anywhere on any news report, anywhere online?
I've seen headlines, as I've scrolled through my news feeds, but I haven't read anything.
Listen to any kind of audio feed of any of the proceedings?
No.
All right, that concludes my line of questioning. Mr. Archibald, you raised the objection at this point. If you'd like to question the witness before he testifies, you can do so.
Mr. Pulowski, you're married to the formerly known as Melanie Bedreau.
Yes.
And how long have you two been married?
Just about 4 years, 3.5 years now.
Were you in the same meeting where your wife met with FBI agent Doug Hart and prosecutor Lindsay Blake?
No, we were separate during those times.
And you came from, where do you live now?
Arizona, Mesa.
And you came here with Melanie how long ago?
We arrived on Monday.
And Mr. Pulowski, if you could just forward
Yes,
to the
I'm sorry.
microphone, please.
We arrived Monday.
So this is your third day in Idaho?
Yes.
And have you and Melanie talked about this case?
Yes.
And Melanie made a statement to the prosecutor and the officer, the nail is already in Lori's coffin.
Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay for this witness. He already indicated he was not in the room or present for any conversation.
So my question is, did you hear her say that?
No.
Is that what she said to you?
No.
Has she ever said anything like that to you?
No.
Have you said anything like that to her?
No.
Now, you brought an attorney with you, right?
Yes.
And why is that?
This is just a complicated matter, and I just feel better navigating it with an attorney present.
Are you aware that your attorney was also here with another witness?
Yes.
And did you talk to your attorney about what the other witness said?
No.
You understand that an attorney is legally and ethically obligated to tell his client everything.
Your Honor, I'm going to object here. I think that's a mischaracterization, and I think this is going well beyond the exclusionary issue that we're supposed to be dealing with.
On the first grounds there, I'll sustain that.
So you're claiming that your attorney, who was also here with another witness, did not tell you anything about what the other witness said?
Objection asked and answered.
Hasn't been answered, but go ahead. You can answer that.
Sorry, could you restate that?
You're claiming that your attorney has not told you one thing about Zulema Pastina's testimony here.
Correct.
Did you ask?
No.
He didn't tell you?
No.
Now, you worked with FBI to record people who did not know they were being recorded, right?
Objection, Your Honor. This is getting way beyond the exclusionary.
That's sustained. The only issue at this point, Mr. Archibald, narrowed in the scope of whether or not he has been exposed to any of the trial testimony for the exclusionary order.
So, Mr. Pulowski, you're claiming that you don't know anything about this case because you haven't listened to anything since it started 5 weeks ago.
Correct.
Did you talk to Agent Doug Hart?
Yes.
Did you talk to Prosecutor Lindsay Blake?
Yes.
Did they tell you what had happened in court?
No.
Did you ask?
No.
What did you and Doug Hart and Lindsay Blake talk about?
We discussed just the testimony that I'm going to be giving.
Okay. And so you rehearsed your testimony with them?
Correct.
I don't have anything else.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Archibald. Any questions from the state?
Your Honor, if we can have just one moment, please.
Yes.
Mr. Pulowski, just to be clear, have you observed, either through reading any articles or recaps of testimony or listening to it, any testimony that has occurred in this trial?
Not at all.
When you met with myself and Agent Hart, did we discuss anyone else's testimony?
No.
Did we discuss the contents of anyone else's testimony with you?
No.
Did we simply go over questions that we would be asking and your potential answers?
Yes.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Upon that inquiry, the court's reviewed the rule that's been issued in this case, as well as the case of State versus Danson, 113 Idaho 746, that talks about the purpose of the exclusionary rule and indicates it's within a trial court's discretion to determine whether it's been violated or what sanctions should be imposed if it has. The court, having found no evidence based on the testimony of the witness that there has been any violation of the exclusionary rule, will overrule the defendant's objection, and the witness may be permitted to testify before the jury. So that'll be the court's ruling on that issue. This time, then, we'll go ahead and allow the jurors to be brought in.
All right, please. Jury's all present, can I report, Your Honor?
Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Please be seated. Okay, we're on the record. CR 22211624, State of Idaho versus Lori Vallow. The witness on the stand at this time has previously been sworn. Before we begin with his testimony before the jury, let me just indicate, Mr. Pulowski, if you'd kind of make sure to sit forward and talk directly into that microphone, it'll help keep the record clear. Also, please answer verbally any questions asked and try not to talk at the same time as anyone questioning you, so we keep a clear record. With that, the state can commence with the direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Wherever you are.
Would you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Yes, Ian Pawlowski, Pawlowski.
Do you know Lori Vallow or Lori Daybell?
Yes.
How do you know her?
We met briefly right after I began dating my wife, Melanie Pawlowski.
And do you know how Melanie is related to Lori?
Melanie is her niece.
Do you recall approximately the first time you met Lori Vallow?
I want to say it was between November 20th and November 25th. It was right before we went down for Thanksgiving of 2019.
And when you say when we went down for Thanksgiving, who is the we you're referencing?
So I traveled down, and then Melanie came and met me later.
And that would be Melanie that is now your wife?
Correct.
So Lori did not travel down there?
No.
And when you say down there, where were you going?
Arizona.
When you met Lori, was that a face-to-face visit?
First time, yes.
Do you recall approximately, or actually let me back up, do you know an individual named Chad Daybell?
Yes.
And do you know who he is?
He is married to Lori.
Do you recall meeting him?
Yes.
And when was that?
It was the same time I met Lori.
Did you meet him in person?
Yes.
Were they together when you met them?
Yes.
Do you recall where you met them as far as the location?
Yes.
And
that was at the apartment just next to Melanie's.
When you met them, did you have any substantive discussions the first time?
No.
Did you come to know or learn of the relationship Melanie had with Lori and Chad?
Yes.
And what kind of relationship was that?
It was a very close, supportive relationship.
Was it so close that, in fact, you went to Lori and Chad first before asking Melanie to marry you?
Yes.
Do you recall approximately how many times you either saw in person or spoke with Lori?
It was less than a dozen.
And how about with Chad?
Fewer.
Did you have any conversations with Chad when Lori wasn't present?
Not that I recall.
Did you have some conversations with Lori when Chad was not there?
Yes.
At some point in those conversations, did Lori talk to you about her purported beliefs?
Yes.
What were some of the beliefs that she talked about?
Your Honor, I'm going to object this to vague.
I will sustain that. It's just a question about beliefs in general.
In talking about beliefs, specifically, did she talk to you about purported religious beliefs?
Yes.
And referencing those religious beliefs, what were some of the things she told you?
She discussed, there were beliefs about possession. There were beliefs about locking Satan away. Those are the two that stand out the most.
And with those references, did you ever hear her use the term casting or casting out?
Yes.
And when these conversations took place, were there other people present?
Yes.
At times, did that include Melanie?
Yes.
Was Melanie present for the majority of the conversations?
All of them.
Did you ever hear Chad talk about those same terms?
He was present. I don't specifically recall if he stated anything. Lori typically did most of the talking, but Chad was typically there and acted as a support to what Lori was saying.
Do you recall her ever talking to you about multiple probations or multiple creations?
I don't recall anything specifically about that from her, no.
And you talked about you and Melanie had headed down to Arizona. Was that for Thanksgiving of 2019?
Yes.
At some point, did the two of you return to Rexburg?
Yes.
When you returned to Rexburg, do you recall if Chad and Lori were still there?
They were not.
Do you know where they were?
No.
Had you ever been to the apartment that Lori resided at in Rexburg?
Prior to that, no.
Had you gone to her apartment when you first met her?
Yes.
And Chad was present in the apartment?
Correct.
Do you know if he was residing there with her?
I don't.
Did you see when you met her, did you ever see J.J. Vallow?
No.
Did you ever see Tylee Ryan?
No.
Did you know of their existence when you first met Lori and Chad?
Yes.
Did Lori ever say anything to you about where they were?
No.
Did you see any indication that there were children living in the apartment?
Yes.
And what indications did you see?
I saw backpacks that looked like they were for children, luggage that looked like, they were designed for kids.
Did you ever look at any bedrooms in that residence?
Yes.
And did you see signs of children there?
No.
And when you had conversations with Chad and Lori, did you ever hear Tylee or JJ in the background?
No.
Was there ever mention of Tylee and JJ in your conversations with Lori?
Not that I recall.
When Lori talked to you about these things, were you open to hearing them?
Yes.
And why was that?
I'm religious. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a large part of our belief is faith in revelation, and that the church is a living thing. It's not done progressing. It's not done growing. And so part of that is, you have to maintain an open mind when new things come. So if I was going to learn something new, it would either be through one of the Lord's servants, or I'd receive the revelation directly. So that and at that point in my life, I was kind of going through a religious renaissance of my own. I was trying to, I had just gone through a rough divorce, and I was trying to rebuild myself. So I was open. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so. And about how long did it take for you to determine that you were not open to the ideas being presented by Ms. Vallow?
A few days.
And were there some specific things she was telling you that made it so you were no longer open to what she was talking about?
Yes.
And what were those things?
So one of those things was the possession. The people who she was saying were possessed was one of them. The rankings that were being given, people being determined as light and dark, was alarming. That sounded to me like something that could not change. It was a predetermined thing. Talking about light and dark contracts that were signed before this life. I know there were a few others, but they don't come to my mind right now.
When you talk about the light and dark, who is it that was telling you about the light and dark ranking system?
So the first time I heard about that, I want to say it was Melanie that explained it to me, as she had heard it from Chad. That was the first time.
At some point, did Lori talk to you about the light and dark system?
It was referred to in conversations, but never directly explained.
And you talked about some of the people some of the people Lori was saying were possessed. Do you recall who some of those individuals were?
Law enforcement.
Did you ever hear her use the term zombies?
Yes.
Was that also in reference to some law enforcement?
Yes.
Were there specific officers that she referenced?
Yes.
who were they, if you can remember?
Detective Hermosillo and I believe Detective Hope, if I recall correctly.
And do you know if they work with the Rexburg Police Department?
They do.
At some point, so you were no longer open to the beliefs or the religious beliefs that she was purporting to have at that point.
Right.
At some point, did something cause you concern?
There were numerous things. The point where it really turned for me was the morning after my marriage to Melanie. Melanie had dumped her fears on me. Her just everything that she'd been experiencing, there was just a whirlwind of, there's a mess going on. And she shared everything that she thought and worried about with me. And so the morning following that, we were staying at the Bellagio in Las Vegas, and my two children, Max and Lily, were with me at the time. The next morning I got up and my daughter was gone. We couldn't find her anywhere. She was gone for about 15 minutes. We looked all over the room for her. We were calling for her. Not a sound. She was nowhere. And then finally I hear some giggling from behind a curtain, and I can see her feet underneath, and she comes out. She thought it was the funniest thing in the world. But for me, after hearing everything that I had the night before, that was terrifying. And at that point I decided I'm not going to give this a chance. I'm not going to mess with it. Something needs to happen.
And were some of the things you heard regarding Tylee Ryan and J.J. Vallow?
Yes.
Did you have concerns for their safety or their well-being after what you learned?
Yes.
Did some of the things deal with an attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux?
Yes.
Did you have concerns about you and or your ex-wife's safety based on some of that information?
Yes.
And because of that, did you end up going to law enforcement?
Yes.
Do you recall approximately when you met with law enforcement?
I want to say it was December 5th or 6th that I met with them.
And that would have been of 2019?
Correct.
And when did you say, and I may not have asked you, but when did you get married to Melanie?
It was November 30th, 2019.
So less than a week later, you were at law enforcement?
Correct.
Did law enforcement end up asking for your assistance?
Yes.
And what did they ask for your assistance with?
They asked me to just listen and observe and report back, and they also asked me to make recordings for them.
And did they instruct you to make sure that you were present and party to any conversations you were recording?
Yes.
Did you in fact do that?
Yes.
Did you produce the recordings to the police department?
Yes.
In those recordings, did Chad ever confess directly to a crime?
No.
Did Lori ever confess directly to any crime?
No.
Do some of those recordings contain some of the information you've provided here today regarding the religious beliefs
Yes.
Lori purported to have? Did Lori or Chad ever instruct you regarding whether or not to cooperate with law enforcement?
Yes.
And what were you instructed?
To cooperate as little as possible to avoid them. There was just kind of this arrogant, flippant attitude toward law enforcement. That was just none of their business, and we needed to get out of town was another thing that they instructed us to do.
And did those instructions come from both Chad and Lori?
It was mostly Chad pushing us to get out of town. Both Chad had a more serious tone. Lori was kind of presented this lighthearted attitude toward cooperating with law enforcement, just to kind of avoid it.
And was part of that telling you that some of the law enforcement officers were dark spirits or zombies?
Yes.
Just one moment. And you indicated that your wife Melanie was present for these conversations as well?
Correct.
And would it be fair to say that Melanie looked to Chad and Lori as a mother and father figure?
Yes.
Do you believe that she was susceptible to what they were telling her?
Yes.
Did she at times indicate to you, or did you believe that she shared some of, or was open to these religious beliefs that they were purporting to have?
She was open to them. The way she presented them to me is, hey, this is what they're saying. What do you think?
And would you say out of the two of them, Melanie was closer to either Lori or Chad?
Absolutely closer to Lori.
I have no further questions.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Blake. Let's see who will be doing cross.
Your Honor, I'll be doing the cross, but given the fact that the state has referenced some wire or recordings, we were planning on hearing those, and we're not going to be prepared to offer those up. That's going to be a big part of my cross-examination, so I'm just wondering if the court's willing to break a few minutes early today so that we can get that onto a drive so that he can testify as to that.
And, Your Honor, can we have a brief sidebar?
Yes. All right. Upon conferring with counsel in a sidebar, the defense does intend to introduce some exhibits, which may take some time. However, they're going to make a further review of that, see where they agree or disagree with the state. We may probably hear motion on that in the morning, potentially outside of the presence of the jury, to determine where that stands. In order to allow the parties to get prepared for that, I am going to find that we'll conclude for this afternoon for the day's proceedings, and so we'll just plan on starting again tomorrow. I'll also indicate tomorrow there's another hearing the court has to take up later in the afternoon, so we'll be stopping a little bit early tomorrow, probably around 3:10, no later than 3:15 for our end time tomorrow. So that will conclude the testimony for today. The cross-examination of this witness will commence in the morning before we break for the day. I will give the jurors the daily admonishment to please continue to follow the court's instruction to not discuss this case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. Please don't look the case up, read about it in any way. If you see it being reported in the media, please don't watch the reports, and continue to do your duty to remain impartial in this case so you can reach a verdict only on the evidence that you've seen here in court. With that in mind, we appreciate your continued service, and we will recess for the day.
All right, please.